consulting had clicked in. I realized that she just gave us a 2x2.
Oh, sure. The purpose of this particular session is, as we were imagining at the time, is to take the conversation one step further. You just heard about industry trends and what industry is looking for in terms of business graduates. And we want to take that next step and ask how we can, in fact, partner with industry to achieve that. And in order to do that, I'm very happy to introduce to you a group of colleagues here on the panel that have intimate experiences dealing with the partnerships between academe and industry. So I'll quickly mention them, and by the way, for your convenience, we've lined ourselves up along with our pictures. So to my left is Brett Palmer, who's the president of the Small Business Investor Alliance. After that is Donde Plowman, who is the dean at the University of Nebraska. And after that, executive in residence and former CEO of ConAgra is Gary Rodkin. And finally, a colleague of mine from Fisher, Thomas Stewart, who's the executive director for our National Center for the Middle Market. What we will try to do is, in order to take that next step about what these partnerships can synergistically do for both academe and for industry, we'll go through and share some experiences. And in fact, I will also invite my colleagues at that time to highlight those pertinent personal experiences in this context. What are middle markets? These are firms, by our definition, that have revenues between 10 million and $1 billion. I know it's very large territory, and we chop it up into 3 parts for everything we do. But in this zone, in the US, there are roughly 200,000 firms, which makes up about, in numbers, 3% of all firms in the US economy. But you'll be surprised to know that this 3% of all firms accounts for about 1/3 of all private sector jobs. And yet we know very little about it. And the reason we know very little about this sector is because they are usually privately held, family-owned, or private equity-owned. So the result of that is we literally know very little. So here's an opportunity where we can do all these 3 things that I talked about. So we can do the deep dive in terms of the discipline learning about these firms, and in particular, we do research. So what's the kind of research that we do? Of course, we sponsor academic research. And by the way, not just for Fisher faculty, wherever the best brains are available. So we've given grants at Maryland, at Columbia, at Chicago, whatever, wherever the interest and ability lies. But here's the partnership with industry. We also write white papers on digitalization in the middle market, the globalization problems of the middle market, etc. And now we work with people in industry. Sometimes they're associations, like the National Association of Manufacturers. Sometimes it's Brookings. Sometimes it's the Milken Institute. Depending on the topic, we partner. Okay. We also bring out a quarterly survey where we talk to 1,000 middle market C-level managers, asking them, where are revenues going? What are your challenges? What's happening to investments? So you see the exchange, and these questions are frequently formed by talking to executives. In turn, we hope that this product is also useful to them. So this is, by the way, something that we are rolling out as a typical method of engagement with industry through our centers. So we have about 10 centers at Fisher, and they all tend to follow more increasingly over time this format of research, industry engagement, and student-related activities. Each of these, you will see, I hope, the two-way street with the industry, or what we learn and what we give, and hopefully all of that is synergistic. So I talked about research. Let me also tell you about engagement. So in the last 4 or 5 years of the existence of this center, we must have made more than 100 presentations across the country. We are on the keynote panel for ACG, which is the Association for Corporate Growth. We've been to all the major cities and spoken with executives, and in turn got feedback about the issues we should be studying, etc. On our website, you will find videotapes of what executives are telling us is happening in this sector and why that is important, etc. And finally, from the student side, there was mention about case competitions. Yes, we do case competition, but we also have a course on middle markets. And the course is a two-way street, again, between industry and us. How? Because in one semester, with the executives giving some of the talks and the instructor, the rest of them, we go through learning about what are the challenges of this sector, what are the strengths, the weaknesses, how do we stand internationally, the various issues across all the disciplines of business. But in addition, in the next semester, we get them to work on real projects with executives from corporations involved. Now you can see how our purpose of education, the building up of the discipline, the building up of the experiential, and the building up of the interpersonal skills as they deal with executives, etc. All these. And it's only possible because of partnership with industry, okay? So this is my example of it, and the way we've structured our panel is that we'll go through my colleagues on the panel, and then we'll actually stop for Q&A, and then come back for additional comments.
Well, thank you very much, Anil. My name is Brett Palmer. I'm president of the Small Business Investor Alliance. I'd like to first and foremost thank Rutgers for hosting this event and having me, and Anil for having me on their panel. We are a trade association of private equity funds, particularly lower middle market private equity funds. On the previous panel, one of the speakers was a banker, talked about how he felt that they were under hostile view generally in the public. There's no more hostile view, and I may make him look very good by comparison because I'm a Washington private equity lobbyist, which the only thing I could do to be more unpopular in the nation is run for president, which there's no danger of that. But we are a trade association of lower middle market private equity funds, and again, to give some sense of scale, that's about $100 billion in domestic investment, which in the grand scheme of things are not big numbers, but actually is quite significant. I'm on this panel because what we represent are a lot of your potential places of employment for your students, your graduates, as well as, frankly, one of your markets and potential partners. From the previous panel, talking about whether MBAs are being hired. If you're going to a private equity fund, if you don't have an MBA, you're not going to the private equity fund. So, and these are private equity funds that, again, are smaller and fairly diverse geographically. We have a number of private equity funds in Arkansas and Nebraska, places that are not necessarily thought of as the Dakotas as the centers for private equity, but in the lower middle market of businesses that are sort of 1 million to 15 million in EBITDA. That really is a significant source of business for them. In this part of the market, it's a little bit different as far as their needs than what is conventionally thought of as private equity if you just read the national news, the Wall Street Journal, in that these are smaller businesses, and with smaller businesses, the scale matters a lot as far as their needs. Human capital is always incredibly important, but it is all the more accentuated that importance in a smaller company, because when you're investing in a smaller company, if you have problems with people, you can't just wipe them out and replace them with somebody else because you may have just wiped out your entire investment. It's a different need base. It's a different skill set. It's also, frankly, dealing with businesses that may not be as developed and trained and honed. The business owners themselves commonly do not have MBAs. Sometimes they don't even have college degrees. They're great businesses, great business people, but not necessarily academically trained. And with that, that human capital element is all the more important. And this is particularly acute now, and is going to be more so going forward, because we're facing a significant generational change nationally, where you have a lot of baby boomers and post-baby boomers who started businesses, grew businesses, and are looking to retire. And so the churn is absolutely massive as far as this business turnover and the ability to both reinvent or destroy businesses depending upon how that happens. And this is where the private equity funds see a huge opportunity, but also a significant risk. And so with that, there is a need in our marketplace for partnerships in education. And so we have started one with Ohio State and the National Center for the Middle Market. And its origins really began in the financial crisis. When the financial crisis happened, smaller private equity funds, and I'm talking about these folks generally have $100 million to $250 million in assets in their fund. Their portfolio companies were suddenly hit. They were rocked. I can think of one example where one was a cabinet maker, and they lost 95% of their customers over the course of a 6-month period. That's a pretty big problem. That company survived, by the way, to this day. But these private equity fund managers were suddenly all hands on deck, doing their normal job, but now managing triage, and they approached it differently. And the ones that were more successful were they were bringing all their CEOs in, sitting them in the table, and saying, "Okay, what are you looking at?" Because frankly, they were all terrified. They're humans. They don't have huge cash reserves. They don't have access to bank lines of credit because they were being pulled back left and right. They couldn't go to the sell stock in the public markets because that's not where they are, not where they're going. And so, how did they really get together? And frankly, realizing that they weren't alone was incredibly helpful. And a number of these private equity funds also had relationships with their business schools where they had obviously gone. And some of them pulled them in and frankly gave some context and gave some calm nerves and also gave some sage advice about maybe how to ride these things out. But with that came sort of a bit of a revelation that we were trying to figure out how do we provide a opportunity for these private equity funds to access a market that they can't otherwise, market for knowledge and expertise that they can't otherwise have. The larger private equity funds have their own educational platforms. They'll call them, I'll leave the name blank as far as private equity fund, but basically private equity fund X, university, and they'll come in and they'll train their management teams, the company they're investing in their sort of way of reinventing the business. Well, that works for them, but that's very difficult to do for smaller businesses and smaller private equity funds. So we've set up this partnership with the National Center for the Market in Ohio State, where we as an association are effectively going to be an aggregator to get scale to the business school to provide an efficient way of getting businesses in. And I think next year we're going to have about 150 to 200 lower middle market CEOs come in and do executive training through this platform. And we can do that as an association because we can pull them together where if they were doing it regionally, they may not have critical mass. We had the added benefit of, as Anil mentioned, GE Capital had been the sponsor of the National Center for the Middle Market previously. So they built out this platform. GE Capital was a wonderful operation and did things really well. And so we didn't have to, start off from scratch and didn't have to, create a new wheel. We could actually just start off with what they had and sort of scale it down for our pieces. And so the things that these smaller businesses were looking for, and we surveyed our private equity fund managers, they were looking for, how do you really help these small businesses set their benchmarks, scale up? How do you deal with institutional investment for the first time? Because they may have had bank loans, but it's not the same thing as having private equity funds backing you. How do you attract talent and how do you retain talent and develop talent? Because it's very different in a smaller business. And they couldn't do that on their own. So this partnership really was a nice alignment of interests between the educational training needs of these private equity funds and, frankly, their small businesses. It gave them a competitive. It's going to give them a competitive advantage in the marketplace because not only can they say we're going to offer you capital, we're also going to invest in you personally as managers because a lot of these are management buyouts of the founders, and also, frankly, in some cases, addresses some regulatory needs that they have. And frankly, we used to joke we used to call ourselves the secret society of capitalists in Washington for a number of years because we were actually pro-market from 2006 to 2012. It really helps us sort of highlight that we are doing good things in the world because this part of the private equity generally is not particularly warm and fuzzy in Congress, and we can show what we're doing and doing things well. It also, frankly, creates some new business for the business schools and some new revenue. And it also, the next phase, the ancillary effects, really are to hopefully expose some of these growing businesses to the alumni and the resources of the business school. And so that hopefully will be a virtuous cycle. That's phase one, is sort of going through that partnership. The next partnerships that we're looking to do as an association and frankly as an industry more broadly is working on the diversity of the fund managers, which is, again, when they're hiring MBAs. My next chair of the board is a woman. The chair of the board after that is a woman. Over the course of 9 years, we'll have 4 chairs of our board that are women, which is not common in the private equity space, which is normally could be described as diverse as Wonder Bread. And so, we're going to be doing some outreach as far as doing more hiring into the private equity funds of women. I know that several of our private equity funds that are run by women, when they were looking to hire, they were looking to interview and hire more women. And they're looking for partnerships that'll fill that because in one case I know there was 500 applicants, not one woman. Not one. I don't know why. She didn't know why. And we have a significant women's outreach effort, and that's something that we might be able to work with some of you all in the audience on to get people steered in that direction. And then we're going to be working with the SBA and some other government institutions to sort of broaden that out, both on the private equity fund manager as well as on the board side of the companies they're working on. So with that, I'll turn it over to Donde, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I also want to say thank you to Rutgers and to Dean Lay for this conference. For me, it's great to get to learn from everyone who's here. I already have a bunch of pages of notes, and we've only been into this 3 hours this morning. So I'm going to share with you take a little bit different tact and talk from the perspective of a dean. I've been dean for 6 years at Nebraska. And really, there's 2 main points I want to make, and I've got a little illustration for each one. My first point is, we're going to have industry-academic partnerships, they really have to truly be partnerships where both sides benefit. And I know my colleague Gary is going to speak a little bit more in depth about a partnership between ConAgra and the University of Nebraska. But I think oftentimes as deans, we think about running to industry to get us money to support something we want to do, or like do something for us, as opposed to thinking about what do we do together. And so truly making it a two-way partnership, I think, is huge. And then the second thing is, once you are headed down this path of a partnership, really continuing to build it together. So it's not just okay, I've got you as my partner, and now we'll go off and kind of do what we had wanted to do anyway, and I'll share an example about that. So in terms of true partnerships, one of the things we've happened onto, I say happened because I'd like to say it was strategic, but it wasn't at Nebraska, is we've really been pushing the idea of numerous advisory boards throughout the college. And we now have in our college 15 different advisory boards. When I first arrived there, the Dean's Advisory Board was honestly a fairly weak board with, I don't know how or why the people that were on there had been put on there. So one of the first things I had to do was really kind of, in a very nice way, Nebraska nice, move some people off and invite some others in. And that board is now really CEOs, CFOs, a very high-powered board. People come from around the country to our meetings. But for every program, every department, and I know probably many of you are doing this, one of the things, the part that where we happened onto it was we now in the fall, we've done this now for 7 times, we have every fall, we just did it on Friday, what we call the Partnership Summit, where all of the boards meet in the building on the same day. And we begin with this, everybody in one room, the dean gives a state of the college address. There's something so electric for those boards about all being in one room at one time, looking around the room and going, wow, I didn't know there were all these people all involved in the college. And I'm sorry that Lay, your president's not here, but we do always do it around football. So, oh, and by the way, we beat Oregon on Saturday, but just throwing that in there. So we pick a big football weekend, and we have the meeting all day on Friday. All the meetings occur on the same day. It's quite complex pulling it off for the operations people, but it's a great day. And I think one of the reasons in which ways in which it works is that we give the boards real work to do. So it's not just one of the complaints you'll often get, and I don't know about how many of you from industry who serve on advisory boards will find it. They find it very frustrating to come to these board meetings and then you just sit and listen to the college just kind of go on. And we want to show and tell. You know, we want to show off and tell you all the great things that we're doing. But one of the things we work at, we sort of have a model with our boards, is you try to balance between some showing and telling, because we do want you to leave being more informed about the school and ready to go, you know, advocate on our behalf, but also at least half the meeting on very strategic issues. So putting in front of the board, here's a couple of strategic questions. I, the dean, or I, the chair of the accounting department, or I, the head of this program, really am struggling with. So that leads to another thing that I think makes them work, is it forces us to have to be really transparent. And there's a risk involved in that, because, you know, it was like Rich was talking earlier about sharing information. But if these boards are going to be real, really have an impact, you have to be able to say, this is where we're struggling, and what direction would you give me? Or what are these are the options we're considering, what do you think? How would your firm react to that? So putting it out there, being transparent. I think the other thing that I've seen has made a huge difference for us is that when your alums, industry people, donors have skin in the game, everything changes. We just about completed a $84 million privately funded new building, which we'll move into in a year. And that, for us, we've done that we have now, I think, 1,500 individual gifts to that building. So there was no one huge donor that did it. And one of the electrifying things about that has been all those people with now skin in the game, which means raised expectations. Expectations for how, okay, if I've given 100,000 or $1 million or my 10,000 that was a stretch for me, I feel like I'm a partner with you. And so now what does that mean? It puts a big responsibility on the college, and I think that's, you know, a good thing for us to be accountable for who we are as a college. So the first thing is making it a true partnership, and they love it when there's real work to do, when you're transparent, and when they feel a sense of ownership. The second thing I think that's important is when you really have the chance to build the whatever together. Last year it was about a year and a half ago, we announced a $30 million gift from Gallup and the family that owns Gallup, the Cliftons. And it's a transformational gift for our college. But the little backstory with that gift was that we were in the middle of a capital campaign, and the university was really hoping that Gallup, the family, who are very connected, their father was a faculty member at the university, would want to do something. And we kind of kept pitching things to them that really made sense for us, but not for them. And once the conversation shifted towards, let's talk about how we can honor your father. Wow, just all these ideas became possible. We're building the Don Clifton Strengths Institute in our college, which will be the world's largest strengths lab. Every single one of our freshman students this year have their own personal strengths coach. The family has helped us plan it, build it, and they're helping us with the implementation of it. And so that is different than what I've experienced before. I guess I don't have a big track record with big gifts like that, so let me just say I meant with whatever kind of involvement that you have with a donor, a philanthropist, or whatever, is that them being part of the ongoing delivery of it. So that's them having ownership and being part of helping us think about it. I mean, it's really more through the planning, the brainstorming, the implementation. So in closing, I would just say, just from those two examples, I would say there are challenges in developing these partnerships that are meaningful. I think the first one is reflected in the question I asked Rich earlier, which is, how do you bring the faculty along? So I think as deans, as management teams, we're out there talking about the brand, talking about the mission, crafting those words that in general, I don't know how much they mean to faculty. And so how to bring them along with these partnerships. Sometimes I think my industry partners know more about the college in a way than the average faculty member. So that's a challenge. A second one is continuing to make it mutually beneficial. And then I think the third one is at the same time keeping the appropriate distance, the right meaningful distance between the college and the donor or the industry representative. But I would say try to make it real, true partnership where both sides benefit, and then letting industry person, the donor, help you build it in a real way that has meaning for them. I'll stop right there.
Well, thank you. One of the things I always regretted in my time at Nebraska is that we didn't have a dean of the business school that had any energy or passion. But in any event, I can tell you firsthand what Donde is talking about in terms of that alignment of the industry constituents. It was so real. It was like one. And it was an amazing feeling. And I give you a lot of credit for doing that. I can also tell you, being a Rutgers undergrad and having my folks who are still around come out to the Rutgers-Nebraska game a couple of years ago wearing their proud red Scarlet Knights jerseys. 25 or 30 different people came up to them before the game outside. Thank you so much for being here, for coming to Nebraska. And I said to a friend, when Nebraska comes to Rutgers, I'm not sure it's going to be like that. But anyway, from the very beginning, I started at General Mills, and I could see the value of the linkage between universities and corporations, because we certainly did. Much like we talked about earlier, Procter & Gamble and other companies that do a lot of recruiting. We did a ton of MBA recruiting. And we would invite each of those key schools to come into headquarters and to give, we would call them brown bag lunches, and talk about a specific skill set, sometimes a technical thing, sometimes leadership, but each of the schools would have that opportunity, and yes, they would see it as a good recruiting tool, but we got an awful lot out of it because we got some tremendous functional expertise from the academics at those schools. So that was the very beginning for me, and then moving on, I was at PepsiCo after General Mills, and we made a large acquisition. I led a large acquisition around the year 2000 of Quaker Oats because we wanted to own Gatorade. In any event, that was a very large public company that we had to integrate into PepsiCo, and I went back, I got my MBA at Harvard, and went back and put together a very long-standing program to help us integrate the acquisition, and we called it Outstanding Alone, Better Together. And we took virtually every management person in both companies that were going to work together and put them through that on the campus. So that was another example of integrating academics and corporate America. And then moving on to the last 10 years that I spent was as CEO of ConAgra Foods. Donde talked a little bit about that. And from a public company CEO perspective, I felt it was very important to understand that we certainly couldn't solve all of our problems, and we couldn't take advantage of all of our opportunities by solely focusing internally. We didn't have the knowledge or the talent or the resources to do that, and at the same time, we had a responsibility to be a good corporate citizen. And that meant reaching out to our communities and our institutions. They were a very important constituency for us. So universities, with their ongoing research, with their bank of knowledge, with their talent, clearly that made sense. So putting these two factors together of recognizing we couldn't do it all internally, we needed external help, and understanding we should be a good corporate citizen, really put a strong belief, and you've heard it up here from everybody, that we should always look for win-win opportunities. And those were initiatives that could make a positive impact on both sides. So a win-win where we could get the linkage of the technical expertise from the universities and the practical application from the business. And that really made for what I would always preach, a true return on investment mentality. This was another investment that we were making. If we were going to buy a company or put a new plant in place, invest in a new product, we always would look at return on investment. Why not look at it the same way in these partnerships? And this really means mutually beneficial collaboration that is more than just a rich source of funding for university programs and more than just public relations generous gift for corporate America. Truly mutually collaborative. So importantly, being very explicit about this win-win mentality, not just presuming that that's how we would work, but being very explicit about it with realistic and tangible benefits on both sides. That really sets the right tone. It sets up two-way accountability, and it sets up the right kind of linkage between the two sides. So I'll give you an example, and it isn't totally linked to business school per se, but it's I think a good analogous example. ConAgra Foods and University of Nebraska about 4 or 5 years ago got together to accelerate innovation. For us, it was innovation to help our business. For the university, it was a new innovation campus that University of Nebraska had put a very high priority on. So for us, we were able to tap into Nebraska's food science expertise and some of the most important commodities for us where they really knew their stuff. 2 examples, corn and tomatoes. For example, breeding new hybrids of popcorn for our Orville Redenbacher brand and new hybrids of tomatoes for our Hunt's tomato brand. We also set up projects on emerging food safety practices, on the latest in sanitation techniques, as well as new applications for robotics technology. So besides tapping into the university's knowledge and expertise, we were also able to shut down a pilot plant that resided within one of our major facilities. So we were able to repurpose those assets. Really good return on investment for us. And finally, we hoped to build upon what was already a strong pipeline of university talent coming into the company. And then for the University of Nebraska, they were able to secure us, ConAgra Foods, as a lead partner with truly relevant development work for their students, but also this enabled them to go out and get, I believe, about 20 more corporate partners to really make this innovation campus a reality. So in closing, what are the keys to a partnership and making a partnership like this happen? I think one, support at the very top is absolutely critical. So myself and my heads of R&D and the heads of the operating units, the chancellor at the University of Nebraska, Harvey Perlman, as well as Donde, and even the governor, Governor Heinemann. So that support at the very top, really important. Then a willingness to ideate, to come up with some creative projects, but again, creative projects that would have realistic and tangible objectives and outcomes. Third, a sustained commitment of resources on both sides. So the ability to have the intestinal fortitude to break the inevitable silos, and they are always there on both sides, and be able to break through that to really get to that win-win. And then finally, having that win-win attitude permeate throughout the entire organization on both sides, understanding that you always have to keep the other's perspective in mind.
So thank you, and I'm really glad that both of you brought up football, so that coming from the Ohio State University, I can now project confidence without attitude. I actually want to, Anil and Brett both told a couple of stories about, a little bit about the National Center for the Middle Market, so I don't have to give you our origin story, and I want to take a slightly different tack. and talk about one of the opportunities and challenges that I think are presented to us in thinking about industry-academic partnerships that start from the fact that, like Mike Sineski finding himself in Britain, we are separated by a common language, and that we speak different languages or use terms in different ways, and often have almost a problem of communication that obscures our common interests, and that if we want to seek innovative opportunities, we can find ways to bridge that. Before I came to the National Center for the Middle Market, and I was a little while in the consulting business, and before that I was the editor of the Harvard Business Review, where Ted Levitt, as you know, was a legendary member of the faculty, famous for his articles, many of which in retrospect look to be wrong, but he was certainly never without his enthusiasm and his certainty about his ideas. But one of the things that Ted did, he was one of the last faculty editors of HBR, and he came once after about a year in the role back to the faculty, and he said, I want to tell you what I've learned in my first year as the editor of the Harvard Business Review. He said, the first thing I've learned, he said, is you are all terrible writers. You will never use the active voice if the passive voice is available to you. You will never tell a story when you have instead a dry statistic to report. And you will never say anything interesting if there's something dull to be said instead. The second thing he said was that I've also discovered that our readers are business executives who are very impatient, who do not want a lot of bells and whistles and kerfuffle and throat clearing and bibliographical references and literature reviews and so on and so forth. In other words, he said the Harvard Business Review is a magazine by people who can't write for people who won't read. And what was interesting is that I always took that as our sweet spot. I took that as our challenge, right? Squaring that circle is what makes HBR, and has made HBR successful over so many years, is the ability to resolve that paradox. So you've heard a little bit about the National Center for the Middle Market, and I want to just describe a couple of ways in which we have tried to square that circle or resolve that paradox that I think suggest some ways that might be innovative, and or paths where there might be other opportunities or analogous opportunities for academic industry innovation. One of the things that Anil mentioned is that we are funded by big companies. SunTrust is, I think, the 10th biggest bank, depending on how you measure big in banks. And of course, Cisco and Grant Thornton are very large. And before that, GE Capital was not exactly a small fish in the ponds in which it operated. So we're funded by big companies to study mid-sized companies. Now, the middle market, the middle third of the private sector, companies with revenues between 10 million and $1 billion, are basically unknown. They're a third of jobs, but they're about 60% of job growth. They're the most dynamic part of the economy and fly below the radar, partly because they're private, partly because some of them are family businesses and want to fly below the radars, partly because some of them are owned by private equity firms and only Brett Palmer is allowed to get out from private equity firms. We're funded by big companies for the benefit of mid-sized companies. Now, the big companies get something out of it too because these are their customers, right? So for SunTrust, as for GE Capital, these are the customers they're loaning to, they're doing deals with. Likewise, Cisco, and important, likewise, Grant Thornton, these are their customers. But in a sense, we act as an intermediary helping to create an ecosystem of value. And that's unusual. You just heard about ConAgra, classic custom kinds of programs where a big company comes and Cardinal Health comes to Ohio State and various other people come and create custom programs. IBM has a long-standing custom program with HBS, so on and so forth. You hear about this, but this is something interesting where we're actually creating an ecosystem in a B2B environment. It's not like individual executives coming for exec ed, it's not like MBA students, but it's trying to create value across an ecosystem. And I think that's really interesting. And there may be other ways in which you could think about creating value in new ways. Another thing that's interesting is that, as Brett sort of alluded to, the middle market is an unserved or underserved segment of the education market. Just as there are people who are unbanked, there are people who are untaught or untaught in a business education environment, and for many reasons. They can't afford to spend $30,000 to send somebody for 4 weeks to it's probably more than $30,000 now, probably $60,000 for the AMP program at Harvard. They can't afford to build a custom program. These guys are, as our GE Capital friends used to say, they're very focused in the business. They're spending so much time working in the business, they're not spending a lot of time working on the business. And so whether it is data about the importance of the middle market, or data about innovation strategy, so on and so forth, we're creating knowledge for a group of people who didn't get it before. What's interesting is this also represents an academic greenfield. If you think about what the universal we know about innovation, we know about innovation from the standpoint of startups, and we know about it and entrepreneurs, and we know about innovation from the standpoint of big companies with a portfolio of 10 projects in each of 10 baskets, so they're managing a portfolio. Typical middle market company has 3 innovation projects in a year. Ruck with portfolio theory on that. So how do you manage innovation in a company like that? We don't know, so there's a real opportunity to do research. So if you think about those things, about creating ecosystems, finding new fields of knowledge for people who need this knowledge but haven't been able to get it before, and then think about new impact from that knowledge, new kinds of things that we can do, bringing academic rigor to combine with practitioner relevance. I'm going to double click on that in a second. You have, I think, 3 opportunities for innovative academic business partnerships. Anil mentioned some of the work that we do, so I won't mention too much of that, but one of the things that when we think about impact, we think about the executives whom we have served, and we do an event in Cleveland every year that brings about 200 middle market executives together, often with Ohio State faculty, with Fisher faculty, really do workshops about issues like talent, written in their language and not translated from the language of big companies and lopping off a couple of zeros, but written in their native language and developed in their native language. But we've also had larger impact. The renewal of the Ex-Im Bank this last year includes a provision that the Ex-Im Bank actively seek out middle market companies. And that's partly because we described for the Ex-Im Bank and for a Congressional Caucus on Middle Market Growth that we helped create the importance of this and the importance of the middle market as the cutting edge at the point of the spear of U.S. competitiveness and a segment that should be exporting more. So we're trying to create that real-world impact through academic data, which sort of brings me back to that language problem that I began with. One of the things that I think about is the win-wins that we seek involve resolving some tensions, and those are a tension between rigor, academic rigor, and practitioner relevance, between academic independence and the practitioner saying, if I'm going to give you access, what guarantees or what assurances can I get for that access, between the proven and the new, a desire for the proven and a desire for the new, between the timeless and the timely, between the precise and the broad, between theory and practice, between building a body of knowledge and having real-world impact and building competitive advantage. And these tensions are real, and the scholars that can do it, that can bridge those tensions, can create real value, not only for themselves, but also for the companies we all ostensibly exist to understand and help.
Thank you. At this point, we'll open up for questions, and if there's time left, we'll go back for closing comments.
Hi, my name is Vijay Kumar, and I'm at Virginia Commonwealth University. I was on the faculty for a number of years, and now I've moved over to the dark side, administration. And I mean, we're all heavily focused towards research. The reward system for faculty is geared towards research, with or without any practical applications whatsoever. And I think that's the elephant in the room. I mean, now I'm in the dark side, I've suddenly got religion, and I now want to work with industry. And here's the real problem. The incentive system for faculty is still geared towards research. And Dean Donde mentioned this. Who else is there apart from the dean to go and talk to industry and commerce? How do we motivate faculty? I mean, does there need to be a real change in reward systems and incentives for faculty so that if I go and ask a faculty member, can you talk to a particular industry group, or can you set up, the middle market is a great idea, but our faculty would be more interested in working with General Mills and talk about Harvard Business School than talking with the $10 million firm. So therein lies the real dichotomy, and I'm wondering, as deans and as business people in there, how do we bridge this gap, essentially?
Anil, you get to answer that one.
Sure. Now I won't be brief. So first of all, Vijay Kumar, a colleague of mine from a previous university, and you've raised a very good question, and one with which we struggle. But I think you may have heard as we went through the panel that there is a dialectic here. There is a tension between the ROI needs of industry and within quotes a different type of ROI that academia needs. And we need to find that middle ground where both of them can be additive. Okay. Now, from the dean's point of view, what this means is that when I lay out the objectives for a center, and as I mentioned, trying to roll that out and apply to all our centers, the three channels, or rather 3 buckets of work are research, industry engagement, and students and programs. Notice I started out by research. This, of course, means that the center should support the research mission of the college, which also means that if somebody is to be a director for this center, they are adequately compensated. Now, these are things that you have to help industry appreciate fully, because when the discussion arises as to what topics will be researched, there has to be some give and take here. So you see the kind of tensions. You also see the same tension, and Tom mentioned it, in terms of speed. GE Capital was a wonderful partner with us. But I can tell you, we did have some difficult conversations because they wanted the white paper done yesterday. So these are tensions that you do have to manage, but the payoff is so great, it's truly worth it.
Anil, let me pick up one more thing on this, because I don't think I think you do have to hit a win-win. You can't get rid of, the stuff that gets you tenure. You're not going to change that or change that behavior. So I think you just have to work with it. John Katzenbach, whom I worked with when I was at Booz & Company, and was one of the great experts on corporate culture, says, you don't fight your culture. Culture evolves, and you work with your culture, and you find the things about your culture that you like, and you encourage them, and that will help the culture evolve in the way that you want. So we've given out in just under 5 years more than $2 million in academic grants. So we're supporting that kind of thing, but we're also at the same time constantly nudging these guys, saying, hey, you got a bunch of people out there who want to hear what this looks like in bullet points. Let's work with that, and can we get some practitioner versions of this? And so we try to hit them both. But you have to work with the evolution there and be patient.
May I just add one? I think also the conflict is a little overstated, in the sense that pretty much all these academic papers that are written, I can tell you that the professors are very interested for their ideas to have impact there, and are eager to see what I call the white version of that research as well. And we have to tap into that reserve, because people want impact, and this is a mechanism for that.
This is just a super important question, I think, that goes far beyond this discussion, but I would liken it to what's wrong with most performance review processes. So we've heard the word objectives multiple times in this answer, and I am a gigantic believer in how important it is up front to set the right objectives, because most, all people in this room excluded, but most organizations, their performance review is about making sure that when you come in with those objectives at the beginning of the year to your boss, that you're going to meet all those objectives. And your boss normally takes your objectives and puts them in the drawer, and then 12 months later you come back and you've got check marks. I met all my objectives. I should get a good raise, maybe even a promotion, a big bonus. And your boss says, I guess I can't argue with that, but then he thinks for a minute and says, but you know what? It doesn't feel like you had a very good year. Doesn't feel like it, but you have all checks here because that was your objective. Point of this is that objective setting shouldn't be about activities, shouldn't even be about results. It should be about impact, like you said. Impact, outcomes. And if we're really tough on that, if we're really tough on saying your objectives should be about tangible outcomes, and I know that's a lot easier for me to say on the industry side, but if we really got true on that, and then we were aligned with our industry partners, we would be miles ahead because we did the work up front.
I would add one other thing to what Anil said. I don't think that all faculty can contribute to everything. Not all faculty will be great representatives of the school out in industry, but I think the dean plays an important role of being a connector. At my level, I can see where certain faculty could make a contribution. And actually, faculty, from their standpoint, I think many of them, I agree with Anil, they want to have impact. They have no idea that some of them, that the things that they do would be meaningful and in what way they would be meaningful. And so I think we can help with some of that, but it doesn't have to include all faculty.
Okay, go ahead.
I'd actually like to follow up on that question and turn it around a little bit, because one of the seemingly best-kept secrets is that universities are being completely transformed these days, as is industry. I think the numbers across the country are that only about a third of the people teaching students in universities, including major universities, are tenure-track faculty. Increasingly, we have lots and lots of people teaching students who are not primarily research-oriented in terms of the kinds of things that they do. At the same time, universities are being transformed by technology, by the nature of how students engage with education. Many of them are working full-time, going to school full-time. They're not traditional students, and so on. And many of our business schools have a smaller and smaller proportion of their students in the full-time traditional MBA programs, that increasingly students are getting other types of business education. At the same time, companies are increasingly global, decentralized, transforming, being disintermediated, etc. So I would like to have some observations about how these things come together in the way in which business and the university work together.
Please.
Okay, I'll start with the question about tenure-track faculty, and we call them at my school professors of practice, people who come from industry and or have PhDs, and they have a complete career path for them. They can be an assistant, associate, full professor of practice. They add so much to the school. They bring so much energy. They bring they're phenomenal teachers, and it's just an energy level that's so positive. So it's really, really important. We're at about a third of our faculty are in that category. So it's not as you described. I think that we do it because they bring a game to us that otherwise we don't have, but also there's no kidding about the fact they're a lot less expensive and they teach a lot more and they do a great job. I think that we continue to just all of us probably explore what's the right mix for each of our schools. It might be different. Tenure-track faculty are very expensive, particularly in finance. And so I think, I don't see that as a negative thing. I think it's really very valuable. For us, it has been anyway. Now, where that's all headed, you know, if if our enrollments keep growing and we don't have enough faculty, I mean, I don't know where all that is going to go, but I don't feel like it's out of control. So for us, it's been a positive thing. I think there's a stereotype out there in the world that we academics don't do a very good job of dispelling, which is the kind of the tenured faculty member who kind of just has a real easy life. And I think if we don't demand a lot of tenured faculty, that could be true, but I don't think in general that is the truth. And I think we have to kind of continue to inform better, certainly public schools, what we do, what the role of research is, who's doing it, how it works, and what its impact is. I don't think we sell ourselves very well at all. We're Midwesterners, we're humble, we kind of like don't brag, and that gets us in trouble, I think, sometimes with the public perception about tenure faculty.
Thank you. Anybody wants to add? Since we are running out of time, I'll be very brief on adding to that. And essentially, you know, as we pointed out, it takes multiple dimensions of preparation to, you know, provide the right education, be it the discipline, the experiential, or the interpersonal skills. And so, indeed, we need a mix of faculty. And as was just pointed out, as long as we are demanding that all those components are performed well, it takes all of that together to produce a good product. We've run out of time, so I thank the panel, and thanks Rutgers again. Thank you all for your time.